Welcome to Candid Conversations with Dr. Kelli, where we dive deep into the conversations that matter most to your mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Kelli Utenham, a passionate advocate for brain health and wellness. And here on this podcast, we explore candid conversations about life, health, and the stories that shape us. Whether it's about mental health, sports, or simply navigating everyday challenges, we keep it real, raw, and relevant. Without further ado, let's get into today's episode.
So I really just want to kind of start with learning more about your story. So could you tell me a little bit if you're up for that? And we can cut and stop whenever you need to.
You talking about Cohen's story of what happened?
What happened? Yes, please.
So, from my understanding, he was on defense and just got, normal play, got tangled up and fell and hit, I assume the back of his head, but anyway, he hit his head on the ground. He stood up and was just standing there with his hands on his head. And coach told him to, coach said something to him, but he didn't respond. Coach walked over to him and said, go to the sidelines. And he still had his hands on his head. He turned around, took about 20 steps, and they could tell he was ready to hit the ground. And they grabbed him, laid him to the ground. And from that point, he never gained consciousness. And step by step, from what I gather and from what the doctors have showed me, progressively, that causes I think it's called a subdural hematoma, and cause some brain swelling. That, of course, led him to get sick, and when he got sick, he ended up aspirating, or he aspirated, and they couldn't get a clear airway. He went into arrest. They was able to revive him. Then where he had aspirated and his O2 sat was so low, that led to brain damage, brain dying. And what happened at that point, where he went for so long with low oxygen, it was his brain was unable to regulate his body, and which led to him perishing.
And you said that you have experience, like you volunteer, you said, with the fire department?
Yes, I've dealt with fire and EMS for the last 24 years on a volunteer level. That's not my primary job, but I've volunteered here at the local fire department for the last 24 years.
Wow. You're a pilot by trade, right?
Yes.
Helicopter pilot?
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to learn more about that a little later, but
okay.
So could you, as with your experience with EMS and fire and volunteering, like what was going through your head, like applying or at least processing, thinking through, did that apply at all? Any like muscle memory? It's different when it's your baby.
Unfortunately, it did. I kind of knew what was taking place. Didn't really want to accept it. And I'm a realist, I knew what was going on. I knew the procedures, up until and including, he was on the vent, and the last hour, the hospital, he was starting to crash, and they done everything they possibly could. And I'm sitting there, 6 feet away watching all this, watching what they're doing to Cohen. It's kind of good and bad. It's probably the hardest scenario I've ever been in as far as watching that take place. But the good thing about it is I left with no questions. I knew 100% they did everything they could to try to save my baby. So it's good and bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that and getting started on this process on helping others. So you said that you have other interviews and wanting to do these talks. So could you tell me about that so I can kind of get an idea of how I can help with information that you would need or want?
Initially, a lot of my interviews have just been the media. and just trying to get the story out there. And I've had some questions arise of, basically my knowledge of concussions and so forth and head trauma. We're transitioning to the point to where people's asking more in-depth questions as far as, medically what happened. There's where I'm a little bit weak on. I've never had to learn, to that point. Um, but yeah, I think if we could educate, not only myself, but if I could share the word and help, coaches, parents, and maybe the other athletes and get this word out there to them, because I played football. My kids been in sports for years, and never at any point in time do I ever recall myself or any other athlete having these talks. It was always, watch for head injuries. If you get a concussion, you're out for, if you got a headache, tell your coach. It never went into detail of what could be taking place, even with minute symptoms.
Mm.
So I think it's important to have, the athletes, parents, and not just coaches and staff. I think we need to expand it further to let everybody else be aware of what may be taking place.
Absolutely. Well, that is a perfect transition because that is exactly what we do at Brain Talk. We do talk about the nitty gritty and the medical side of it. So I'm going to get this pulled up. Now, I have an interview PowerPoint that I do, and that one is shorter. So I would like to show you the shorter one and then let me know how you're feeling, because we can do multiple if you need a break or what have you. This is really about your comfortability. But then I have a longer one. So I do talks that are really what the audience needs. So I do 90-minute talks, 60, 45, 30 minutes. For time purposes, I kind of shrunk everything down. I do give a trigger warning for imaging and discussion of suicide. If you want to skip that part, we absolutely can, but I will tell you before we get there.
Yeah.
All right. So I assume you are familiar with what a concussion is. Okay.
Now, speaking of what a concussion is, I know me, but if you want to explain that, just so I can basically break it down for other people in simpler terms,
Yes.
that would be great, because that's what I'm here to do as well, is not just educate myself, but be able to speak to other people and in a way they know.
Yes. So that's also what I want to do. So of what you see, let me know, like that's a bit too much, I think, or if we could, because what I want to do is I would like to be doing the talks, but I can't be everywhere.
Right.
But if you can tell me like that's too complicated or what have you, then I can kind of tailor slides that I can share with you and that you can share. But just if like however you want to do it, take notes or stop me and I can take notes. But the recorder's going, so we'll be fine there. But
Good.
either
Good.
way, just keep me posted on what is good or you think is going to be too much.
Okay.
We'll start with concussion. So this is a type of traumatic brain injury. It's caused by a bumper blow or a jolt to the head. And that kind of hit to the body, it causes the head to go back and forth. The brain sits in fluid, as you know, and so the brain is not fixed to the skull. So any kind of sudden movement is going to cause that brain to bounce or twist around in the skull. I always say that it's not just a concussion. That's the second part of my book, the 25,000 mark. It's not just a concussion, because that's what we always hear in sports. I am a former athlete. I love sports, but we always hear that it's just a concussion. I just got dinged. I'll be back. It's no big deal. So this is typically described as a mild brain injury because they're not life-threatening. Usually in about 2 weeks, the symptoms are supposed to clear up. But even a small concussion can be serious. Like you said, it's not monitored. People don't really follow up with it because it's just a concussion. But 3 concussions equals 1 traumatic brain injury. And a lot of times when I go do talks at universities, I talk to a lot of athletes who are saying like, oh yeah, like I'm on my 8th concussion. It's like you're on your way to your 3rd traumatic brain injury, but they're unaware of that. So I like to use an egg analogy. So the skull is the shell, and the yolk inside is like the brain. So just like the yolk, the skull is not attached, it's not fixed. But if you take that egg and you're shaking it, the yolk is still shaking inside. And so same thing with the brain. You can, put a helmet on it, and I know there are wonderful advancements that they're making, guardian caps, and there are all kinds of sensors and things. But if you were to take a 100 yards of bubble wrap and put it around this egg, if I toss it to you, and whether you catch it or drop it, the yolk inside is still going to shake.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important for parents to know, because the best intentions are around all of the things that are being created. But that paired with this knowledge, I think, can really help save a lot of lives and prolong, amateur, collegiate, youth careers in sports, and keep them safer longer. So thinking about this and the helmets, when the helmet is protecting, it is designed to stop the skull from cracking, not necessarily the brain function inside. So same thing with traumatic brain injury. This is caused by a forceful bump, blow, or jolt. And there are primary and secondary injuries for this. So that primary injury, that's going to happen right away. Secondary injury, this is what can take place hours later, days later, or weeks later. It's going to be gradual. So it's important to know those signs so that when they start to present hours, days, or weeks later, parents, teachers, coaches are going to be more alert for those kind of symptoms, and we'll go over those.
Okay.
All right, so persistent post-concussion symptoms. There's also post-concussion syndrome that you'll hear about. These are symptoms that persist after a concussion is supposed to have healed. So in that 2 to 4 weeks, 10 to 14 day period, anything past that, that's where you really need to be concerned with potentially having post-concussion syndrome. And here are some of the symptoms that can persist past that time. So headaches and feeling pressure. This is the most common complaint that we hear with people who experience PCS. Neck pain, sensitivity to light and sound, with cognition, difficulty with memory, attention, thought organization, confusion, so moving slower mentally. So with thought organization, even problem solving, sequencing. So if you think about it, how often do we count the steps that we give to someone? You might say like, hey, Ryan, can you run down the hall, grab me a cup of water, and when you come back up, we'll have a nice chat. Someone who, that's, 4 steps. Someone who is having a difficult time with that could have heard steps. And they're thinking, okay, what do you need me to do with the steps? Go to the steps, go down the steps, meet you at the steps. And when people don't have the knowledge of, I don't know what's happening, there's a lot of analysis paralysis. And so then people are thinking like, what's wrong with you? What are you thinking? Do what I said. And the person who is asking needs to have that consideration too. And that's an important part for why athletes and parents and coaches should advocate for their athletes. Speak up for yourself. Say what you need. Could you repeat that? Something simple like that can make a world of difference in someone who's dealing with a lot of directions every day. Sleep is another one. So if someone is getting more sleep or less sleep than usual, changes in their mood. So if they're more irritable, new feelings of sadness or depression, getting more angry at things that they typically wouldn't get angry at in the past. And then second impact syndrome. Are you familiar with this?
Somewhat.
Okay. So second impact syndrome happens when 2 concussions happen in a relatively short period of time. And that second concussion is inflicted before the first one has fully healed. So after you sustain a concussion, your brain is more susceptible to additional head injuries. And when that happens, the length of recovery extends. So it's going to take longer and longer for those 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th concussions to completely heal. When this happens, the brain loses its ability to self-regulate pressure and blood volume flowing, and this causes rapid and severe brain swelling. You doing okay?
Yep.
So sometimes the brain swelling is so severe that it presses against the skull, and that causes parts of the tissue to go in between those cracks and holes that are in the skull, and that causes a decrease in blood flow. So without that proper blood flow, the brain can't function, and that can cause severe disability or death. And the severity of the concussion doesn't really matter. So if the athlete had two very mild concussions, if that first one was not able to heal, then SIS is still possible. But second impact, that's the name of it, but it could also be a third impact, a fourth impact. So it is rare, but it can be fatal. And the mortality rate is about 50%, but the probability of permanent disability is 100% if something like this happens. So CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, this is a degenerative disease that's found in athletes, military veterans, but anyone who has a history of repeated head trauma. So this includes boxers, hockey, but also outside of sports. This is another branch I'd like to get into as Brain Talk grows and develops, but domestic violence as well. So I believe you said you'd seen the movie Concussion. Have you?
No, I have not.
Okay. This would be a good movie for you to watch when you're up for it. It talks about the discovery of CTE. It came out in 2015. Will Smith depicts the actual doctor who discovered CTE. His name is Dr. Bennett Amalu. He was a forensic neuropathologist, and he discovered CTE in Mike Webster. At that time, everybody considered CTE as a football-related injury, and that was it. So this is Will Smith with Dr. Amalu at the top, and then underneath is the picture of Mike Webster. He was a Pittsburgh Steeler and a Kansas City Chief. He played for 25 years between high school, college, and professional. He was in 245 games, had 17 years and 15 seasons. The condition of his brain at the time of his death was equivalent to 25,000 automobile crashes. So of the 345 NFL players that have been diagnosed with CTE, everything, an official diagnosis for CTE cannot be completed until after death. And so these 345 players all had to be dead before determining this official diagnosis.
Wow.
So there are 4 stages of CTE, and as you can see in color, as they advance, it gets darker in color because that's where the brain particles and matter are dying. Mm-hmm. So the first stage is where you start, you barely notice much, which is why it's important for people to be aware on so that they're keeping an eye on these symptoms. And then stage 2, each of these stages takes on the characteristics and symptoms of the previous stage. The other slides have way more in depth as to what each stage goes into, but these are signs and symptoms to consider for what parents and educators, coaches, athletes themselves should all be keeping an eye out for. So nausea is a big one, dizziness, light. So the cognitive pieces, emotional pieces, those are important, especially for athletes who are still in school and needing to remember homework, plays, practice times, things to tell parents, even, when a game is or a change. Some of those things can slip the mind if the brain is having an injury. All right, so these are just some of the things that I have heard from athletes as I've been doing this work, and why they like to cheat protocols or don't really take it too seriously or think CTE is funny. And I'll let you take a moment to read some of those.
Yeah. I understand this as a former athlete. I mean, you don't want to let the team down. You think it ain't gonna happen to you, and you just want to tough it out and push through it. So,
and you have the best intentions.
Yeah.
Yes. So this next slide, this is my trigger warning. There's a graphic image of a brain, and then there will be athletes that I discuss who have died by suicide. Not all of them, but we're getting ready to go into that part. How would you like to proceed? Are you okay?
Yeah, we can go on.
Okay. All right. So it's not just football. If you can see in the center, that is a picture of a brain with CTE. And I don't think we're going to get into the tau proteins here. We'll switch to the other one for that. But the dark spots that you see, the brain has these proteins that are called tau proteins, TAU. And when the brain gets repeatedly hit and damaged, the tau proteins flip inside out and they become inoperable, basically. And so that causes that damage. And so when you keep having that happen, those repeated injuries, the way that Dr. Amalu described it was if you take wet cement and you pour it down kitchen pipes and you let that cement harden, if you flip the water on, there's no water that's going to get through. And so that is essentially what happens to the brain with CTE, is everything gets blocked. And so the parts of the brain that need blood, all of it, that pathway gets blocked. And because of the damage, no blood can get through. And so those parts of the brain start to die. So if you think about the frontal part of your brain, which, a lot of impact happens when you're playing sports, especially football or rugby, hockey. And this is our problem solver. This is our decision maker. This is our emotional regulator. And so if we're taking a lot of hits to that over and over again, we can have, a trigger reaction for something, or someone may, be more depressed about something. I've spoken to football players who were in the NFL, in the locker room, ready to suit up, parents in the stands, and they are just bawling their eyes out uncontrollably. And they're thinking, why? What is going on? But they're sobbing, and it's just something that they can't get a hold of. But that is the brain misfiring from those injuries, and they're unaware.
Yeah.
So we have soccer here. We have baseball. Sammy Sosa taking a ball to the head there. We've got hockey. As you can see, this gentleman, he is bleeding from the head. And we have MMA, fighting, wrestling, and then we've got a kiddo here, soccer, and then this pretty young lady at the top who is a fighter. So these are the athletes who I go in depth into the other presentation. But we have Ryan Friel at the top. He was a Cincinnati Reds player, and he was diagnosed with stage 2 CTE at the time of his death. He died by suicide, by gunshot wound. He was in his 30s. Next, we have Frank Gifford. He had a very historic play where he was wiped out on the field and taken off. And I believe he was out for definitely the rest of the season, but he may not have been able to return for a year. The next is Reg Fleming. He is a hockey player. He was a very brutal hockey player in the 70s. And he was not diagnosed with CTE because, of course, it wasn't discovered until much later. But in these players, they're noticing these are signs of CTE. So if you look at the black and white picture at the bottom, that's Joe Louis, and he experienced or presented with signs of CTE, but a long time ago, CTE was referred to as being punch drunk. And so this next player is Alex Rodriguez and Hernandez. Either way, I'm sorry. He has a Netflix documentary on his life. And so he presented with signs of CTE. When the doctors examined his brain, they said that he had the brain of someone who was in their 80s with dementia. The same thing for the next picture of the wrestler. This is Chris Benoit. He had signs of CTE, and he was found in his home gym. He was supposed to show up for a wrestling event. He was a very prompt individual, and so it was not like him. So when the Wrestling Association went to look for him, they found him and his family. He had killed his wife and his son and himself in his home gym.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's where they athletes do not act or behave, or people who have CTE do not act or behave in the way that they normally would. And that is a huge sign, which is a big reason why I am incorporating spouses into the work that I'm doing, because a lot of times spouses, partners, they're going to see things in the athlete or their partner that sometimes the athlete doesn't even notice. This last gentleman is Andre Waters. He was a professional football player. They called him Dirty Waters. He was nice off of the field, but he was known for using his head and his helmet as kind of like a weapon. And even back in high school, his high school coaches have been quoted as saying, we told him that that's not good, that's not okay, and that he should stop doing that. But when he got into the NFL and when he got into college, they were kind of like, ramp it up. This is what we want. And so he ended up taking his life by gunshot wound. And he was, I believe, in his early 40s. So I say, who is at risk? Everyone. People always think football, but baseball, soccer, hockey, volleyball. Soccer is actually a big one. Basketball is a big one. Rugby, lacrosse, any sport. I've heard of tennis players who have had really bad concussions. So every sport should be aware. And then I ask my audience members, when do we have a time when the advice, like for concussion, is to do nothing and see how it goes? So if someone gets a really bad break, if someone has a tear, a really bad laceration, a sprain, the first thing people are thinking is, I got to get to the doctor. I need to get to urgent care. And then after that, they're thinking physical therapy. What can I do to rehab this? But because the brain is invisible, a lot of times people will look at someone and say, you look fine, you're good. And so it's important to be able to know these signs within self, within loved ones, so that people can advocate for themselves. And even if someone is saying like, no, I don't really think it's that big of a deal, at least you have other people to help keep an eye on that and say, no, because you forgot where your keys were, last week twice, and you just told me that you found them in the refrigerator or something crazy like that. But giving them the power and that knowledge of, no, I need to go get checked out. So I say that's time to see a medical speech language pathologist. And I say sometimes doctors don't understand. And through my work, I have discovered that physicians are not trained in concussion. They're not trained in protocol. And so when doctors, even concussion doctors, because there actually is no like program or residency or anything like that where doctors can go through and at the end they're like, okay, you are certified, you are a doctor in concussion, this is what you do. And so a lot of doctors will kind of hot potato it around where it's like, oh, well, they came through ortho, but I don't really have much to do, so I'm going to toss them over to this doctor, a neurologist. So another thing, neurologists are not trained in concussion. And so a lot of people think, thank goodness I'm at the neurologist, everything's going to be fine, and we'll get a plan and we'll figure out what to do. The neurologist is not trained in concussion. And so they can provide you with information, but that's not treatment. That's not a referral to a speech therapist, which is what's going to help with the actual cognitive rehabilitation. And so that is the gap that I'm noticing. And so this work that I'm doing is also going to be done for medical doctors, nurse practitioners, people who are referring providers, because as soon as I say, are you referring to a speech therapist? They're like, why would I? And so there's just a lack of knowledge of the part of my field that is specific to this. So in 2021, there was a study done with 126 referring professionals, physicians, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, athletic trainers, and the results showed that not a lot of them were knowledgeable about what it is that speech language pathologists do for concussion and traumatic brain injury. And most of them said that they never refer, and then 19% said that they rarely refer. So if they're not referring, that means that there is an entire population of people who are not getting cognitive rehab when they need it. And physical therapy
Right.
is typically what is what things are geared towards, but that's because of the physical. Can you run? Can you jump? Can you catch? Can you pivot? Can you do your drills safely? But then when you think about the cognitive piece, a lot of times it's what's your mother's maiden name and who's the president. And you can do that in your sleep. So they get passed on, and then they've got stuff that's going on in their head, in their brain, and then they start taking those hits again when they're thinking everything is fine.
Yeah.
So these are some thoughts from athletes that did work with speech therapists afterwards and who decided that they wanted to get care. All right, finishing up. So I say who should keep an eye out: coaches, athletic trainers, the students themselves, parents. I want referees to know, umpires, people who call fights, professors, counselors, anyone who is going to be able to touch, impact athletes, students in a positive way. And then I say thank you. Of course, my references. Okay, so thoughts so far?
It's educational. I think more people need to know about this as well.
What'd you think about for people who are not on the medical side and how people would perceive that?
I think they would be very enlightened and shocked at the same time. I
Okay,
think a lot of people don't think about that. So again, athletes and parents, I think, is important to include too. The knowledge of this.
absolutely. So I can show you some of the more in-depth slides. If you think that would be beneficial, or if you would think that you would want that incorporated into what I share with you. What are you thinking there?
I want, for my purposes, I'm wanting to keep it small, keep it simple, but get the message out there. I think, in a lot of cases, as you probably know, if you get into in depth with people that's really not as invested as maybe I am, they start losing train of thought and go elsewhere. So if we
Correct.
could kind of keep it short, keep it direct, and let that message, basically pack the punch, for lack of better words,
Okay.
without really dragging it out, I think it'll be beneficial.
Okay. So this is 28 slides. Do you think this is too much?
No, that was perfect. That wasn't bad at all.
Okay. All right. I can tailor it for the athletes. Like you can pick which athletes, and then I can add the more detailed slides for those athletes if you'd like.
I think it'd be an eye opener for all sports because in our area, football, baseball, soccer is primary. Basketball players, that's primary. But just kind of let them understand that this can happen at any time, not just football. This is a problem throughout.
Right. Well, I would like to ask you a couple of questions, and then afterwards we can take it from there, wherever you'd like to go with it. You said that when you were younger, you didn't get information on concussion or anything like that. Did you get that with your son? Had things changed at all?
Um, I can't really speak to that, and the reason being is I wasn't at the meetings myself. That's probably a question I should ask. But uh, his mother was there, and I was not. Of course, I was at work, so I
Okay.
wish I had the answer, but I don't.
Okay. All right. But you said that your son played for years, right?
All sports. His was
Yeah.
his only second year playing football. He played once in like little league or midget league. Then this was his first year at a middle school level.
Okay.
He played baseball, basketball, and he is actually currently playing tennis. and he
Oh,
left tennis to go to football.
okay, okay. What about for any of those other sports? Was there any like literature that was sent home or anything from coaches or anything?
Not that I recall, but again, a lot of those times his mother took care of that where I was working. So
Understood. Understood.
sorry.
It's okay. No, this is good information. Good information. Okay. So, of the things that I mentioned in the presentation, was there anything that kind of hit home for you where you were noticing some things, either in yourself or in your son or anybody else that you hang out with that you know? I mean, a lot of us can say, like, I used to play sports or I used to play ball, like anything.
Yeah, definitely a lot of the like second impact stuff and concussion. Thinking back, from the days that I played, yeah, I recognize this, and a lot of my buddies I played with, I just thought they was having a bad day, mad, whatever. But yeah, looking back, and I was trying to associate signs and symptoms with what happened to Cohen. In which case, I didn't find anything that I was aware of. I'd say that there wasn't, but nothing that I knew that was obvious in his case. But yeah, looking back, I've seen that a lot, and we just didn't know. So,
What could you describe some symptoms that you have seen and noticed and how that may have impacted you or your buddies or your son?
um, as far as the signs and symptoms that I've seen that I didn't really think about until you just mentioned, I've had some of my buddies get irritable to the point I was kind of worried about them, wondering why they was having a bad day, but they didn't think they was. And in one case in particular, I seen a guy crying. They sort of nothing was wrong, and it just moments like that stand out. That you're just thinking, well, they're just keeping things inside. Something's going on at home. They're keeping things inside. But now that you and I have talked, I look back and I think, well, I knew the hit that he took on the football field. Maybe it was associated. So,
Um, so you are a former athlete and you are I mean, with your career and volunteering, like I don't think you can get more guy and macho. So I would like your advice. And someone like myself, I like to, I come in peace. I'm a former athlete and I love sports, but
yeah.
what would be your advice, or like if someone like myself were coming to you and you hadn't had this experience or had this information, how would you receive it? Like, how can I package it to where it's not going to be an annoyance or they don't want to hear it to begin with? I mean, that could be it, but from your perspective, what would be a hook or a pull for you that would be like, maybe I need to hear what this person has to say?
Um, Reality is, I mean, you hear concussion, concussion, and it's just one of those things you hear it so often. And when you do hear it, you're just like, you turn a deaf ear to it because, you're like, oh, I know about it. But if you mention, second impact syndrome from concussion, that's something I recently learned as long as I've been around this stuff. Um, so maybe lead with, instead of let me talk to you about concussions, well, let me explain to you second impact that derives from concussions, and that's the way I would lead off because
Okay.
automatically it's going to get my attention and be like, oh, that's something I'm not heard. Um, and I would probably just talk to the ones that, well, like parents, parents are invested in their kids. They want to hear. But even as a parent, you hear concussion, you're like, I've heard it all my life. I know about concussions. But hey, let me tell you what to look for on second impact syndrome. Okay, I've not heard that, so I'm going to be triggered to pay more attention. That's the way I would approach it and get their attention to start with.
Okay, that's good information. That makes sense to be kind of numb to the word concussion, concussion, concussion.
Hmm.
How would you say that numbness is when you hear TBI and CTE? I know CTE is newer.
Um, Again, I didn't know what the acronyms was, and be honest with you, when I hear acronyms, personally, I hear so many acronyms, unless it directly applies, I don't even care to learn them because it's just another acronym to keep up with. So I would lead off with the long format of it and be like, hey, this is commonly known as, you know, but because as soon as I hear acronym, it just like my brain shuts off because I hear them so much. I don't want to learn another one if I don't have to.
Okay. Wow, that's really good information too. Thank you. Okay. So, of what you have seen, are there any questions that you have?
Uh, no, I mean, I'm sure there will be, but as of right now, I mean, I can't think of anything.
Okay. So, if you have any questions or anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to talk, continue this conversation. Um, just thank you. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you taking your time to educate me on this.
It's my pleasure. This is my passion. I want people to be safe. I want people to have brains that last them a lifetime. People with less, diagnoses later on in life. So if we can do it now, that's what I want. My goal is to get into schools and do brain talk day. So like dare when, dare to be different and all of that. So I remember those things of don't do drugs and all of that. And I don't remember everything in the workbooks, but I remember some things. Like I remember the colors. So I'm like, I want the bright the bright colors that are going to stand out for
Right.
people. If they can remember like that Dr. Kelli lady, she said if my memory was off, then I should talk to somebody. And I want to give people, what to do if you go to the hospital, what to ask the doctor, because if the doctor isn't aware, then the parent or the athlete should know to ask for a speech therapy referral, order, or prescription, and then find out how long that's good for. Because some prescriptions are good for 6 months, some are good for a year, 18 months. And I call that the golden ticket, because if in 3 months you start noticing I'm blacking out and I don't know why, or I cannot remember this person's name, or these things are on the tip of my tongue, or school is so overwhelming, you still have that golden ticket and you can find a speech therapist and you already have your order and you can get started.
Okay.
So all
Makes
of
sense.
that, pardon?
I said makes sense.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So all of that are things that I want to share and spread. And I do have a brain talk day that's coming up I'm excited about, but I want to get it into schools so that youth can hear this and educators can hear this, principals, counselors, everybody needs to be aware of these signs so that they can help.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you so much. If you don't have any more questions, we can wrap.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you again, Kelly. I appreciate it. And again, there are probably going to be questions pop up, so I'll be reaching back out.
Absolutely. And if you can't get me, just send me a text message. I may be in session, but as soon as I'm out of session, I will hit you right back, okay?
Okay. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thank you for tuning in to Candid Conversations with Dr. Kelli. I hope today's discussion left you inspired, informed, and ready to take on your next challenge with a clearer mind. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, keep striving for a healthier mind and a happier life. I'm Dr. Kelli, and this has been another Candid Conversation.